Welcome back, folks, to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, or City of Demons, as you know I like to say these days, especially nowadays. And we are internationally syndicated, starting with our home base, 107.7 FM, New Orleans, Louisiana, UPRN, as well as Deprogrammed Radio in the United Kingdom, as well as all the other terrestrial, non-terrestrial stations from Hong Kong, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, all of those. You know exactly where you can listen to this. And not to mention iHeartMedia. I'm actually kind of shocked that iHeartMedia is carrying this type of show because of many of the offenses, I guess you could say, the mainstream would sort of hear. Now, today we bring back a guest who's backed by very, very popular demand. As a matter of fact, you folks literally have asked for him to come back very soon since he was just on, and I could see why. He is not just an amazing guest. I consider him a great friend. He is a mentor, and he is one of the most brilliant people walking this planet today. Very, very intelligent. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about if you've seen all the social media. That happens to be the one and only Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Michael Aquino, PhD. Doctor, welcome back.
Well, thank you very much for that very humbling introduction, Dr. J. It's a pleasure to be back.
It's absolutely true. I mean every word of it. Now, I did promise, and I even mentioned this to you off air, that the listeners, I would focus on their questions because there's a lot of huge fans for you. So, starting with there, that's where I'm going to go. Literally, the first question is from Lars Saturn. In quotes, he says, in a mind war campaign, may Dr. Aquino break down how alpha-EMF would be deployed and accomplished, meaning the use of satellites, stationary EMF units, a complete focus on EMF disbursement?
Well, I think what he's talking about, of course, is the principle of resonance that applies to human brain waves, namely that if you're in an atmosphere or an environment that has a concentration of alpha frequency radiation in it on the electromagnetic spectrum, then your brain will tend to align to that. And this does not require any kind of special device like a headset or probes or anything like that, because these are subsonic electromagnetic waves, and they go right through your skin, through your skeleton. Essentially nothing can stop them in reaching your brain. And you have the four fairly well-known ones, alpha, beta, theta, and delta, which we are somewhat familiar with. Alpha tends to be relaxation, alertness, sort of a peaceful, positive attitude. Beta tends to be concentrated thinking, more agitation, more intensity, more nervousness at the same time for exactly the same reason. And delta is deep sleep. If you blanket an area with delta, you'll just put everybody to sleep. Then there is the very interesting area of theta. Some people, particularly in the West, have tended to shrug off theta as being very much like alpha. Back in the 80s, when the Soviets were doing a lot of research in this area, they had an entirely different indicative of hyperbrain activity leading to ESP phenomena. When they were experimenting with psychokinesis and similar areas in which they were trying to get the brain or the individual to be active outside of his personal body, in a theta consciousness, in a theta-rich environment, they would see more positive results from it. So they tended to associate theta as the mystery brainwave. And our own research has not really gone beyond the alpha level of it out here, indicating that they just sort of say, well, alpha and theta might as well be the same thing as far as Western science is concerned. So anyway, in my book Mind War, I discuss brainwave resonance as one of 13 or 14 different psychons or psychological control systems that can be used to change human attitudes at the subconscious level. And we have to remember that what we're talking about here is not mind control in the sense of trying to work people like puppets or tell them what to think or do. We're trying to take a very chaotic mental state that is the normal state that we exist in every day, a sort of a big chaos or a big soup of garbage that we live in on a day-to-day basis, particularly in this electronic age when we're blanketed by all this random electronic stuff all the time. And we are trying to create a calm, positive, reflective environment where people can basically get their shit together instead of lashing around like hysterical kids. So what your questioner is essentially asking is if you and you can and you use the psychon that has to do with brainwaves, what are some of the ways that you could use this to blanket an area? Now that depends upon the area in question. If you're dealing with a room full of people, then of course you can have a local generator, a sub-audio frequency generator. You can even find apps that you can download onto your iPhone and generate these waves there. And it'd be an amusing experiment for your audience to look into this, because you can actually get generators for your iPhone that'll generate these different brain waves. And if you put them on the iPhone's speaker system or on an expanded speaker system and you're in a room full of people, just change the frequencies around between those areas and watch what happens. If you wake people up, put them to sleep, calm them down, smart them up, or start fistfights. So if you are in a room full of people, you can have a generator, of course, that will cover that room. When you get beyond that, if you're getting into an outside area, then you have a different, more difficult problem, because you can't control the external electromagnetic frequency waves that easily, because you're dealing with a blanketed atmosphere that's all full of garbage. The only thing you can do is, within a targeted area, you can try to focus and to overwhelm it in that area with a directed transmitter of some sort. And you can use satellite for that, you can use radio for it, you can use large loudspeaker kinds of systems that are basically transmitting at the subsonic level. It all depends on how much you can control the atmosphere in that area and what devices that you can use to do it with. So that would be my answer, without getting anybody too confused, is to say you use a transmitter that'll cover your area, and you try to narrow it as best as possible, and you try to make it as intense as possible to overcome any existing garbage that's already in that environment. Once or twice when I was at Fort Bragg and talking about this with some generals, and they said, well, can you demonstrate that? I said, officers here in the JFK Center and a frequency generator, and don't tell them what's going to happen. And you can stand up front and you can teach a class, and I'll sit in the back with this thing and I'll have them either pay attention to you or fall asleep. And they say, get out of here, Colonel. Okay, hope that helps.
It does. As a matter of fact, there is another question that's sort of related, and there's quite two parts, so maybe you can make sense of the second part. If Dr. Aquino was in the USA, which of course I know you are, and wanted to influence with alpha EMF, how would he do it? And the second part is in Budapest.
If I'm in the United States and I want to influence the United States by alpha, then of course, if you're saying about the whole country, the ways to do it would be to look for media which would reach the maximum number of people. And you could do this, you could actually do this over the internet through people's computers, because they can receive radio frequency generated information. So if somebody logs onto his computer, he may not hear it, but he's receiving alpha into his den or his room or wherever. You could do it over the television, over the radio, over anything that's a medium to generate this stuff. I can't really say that we have the capability to kind of turn a switch and reach up to some Earth satellite right now and just sort of alpha the whole USA directly from that. There's just the systems that are up there in orbit are too weak to do that, and they're also not set up to do it, and they're targeted for a different kind of electromagnetic spectrum communication than that kind of thing. So you don't have like big loudspeaker systems up there that can do that kind of thing. But you could very easily do it, as I said, through linking into television, to radio, like we're doing right now. I could take an alpha frequency generator right now. I could switch it on, hold up a piece of this phone, you in a good frame of mind, and also put your listeners in a good frame of mind. Or if you find this boring, I could just turn it to delta and put us all to sleep. And nobody would hear any of this because it's all at the subsonic level, so you wouldn't hear anything.
It would just be a dream, I would think, at that point. If even that, right? Yeah. If we're all asleep in a delta. Right. Okay, continue.
Just figure this out again as something where you're trying to get an electronic signal across to people, and you just have to figure out how to do it. The same way that you would do it by a telephone, by radio, by internet. You could use the same thing for brainwave resonance and do it that way. And as far as I think he mentioned a foreign country
Budapest.
Or a foreign capital, yes, okay. Well, you'd have to, if you were trying to influence that capital, you'd have to get into their communication systems, reach into them, and do it to them.
Now, continuing with the questions, any good books he would recommend about EMF? What did he read? Meaning, of course, you.
Well, the shortest answer to that is pick up a copy of my book that's called Mind War, because I go into this electromagnetic spectrum information in great detail in the chapter that's on the Mind War psychons, and it's intensely footnoted, and there's an extensive bibliography at the back of the book. And a lot of these psychons work together in conjunction with one another. So, for example, if you're dealing with brainwave resonance, then you also get into the area of magnetism and magnetic fields, and into field theory generally, because, as you know, we are biochemical machines, and we are not just simply electronic machines. So if you're going to try to get people in a particular state of receptivity, you need to address as many of these things as possible, and that includes the biological aspect, the cycles that affect the human body in a physical sense, the magnetic and electronic fields that affect it. You look at the whole package, the sight, the color systems, and you put it all together. So I would say, again, pick up my book, Mind War, then just head for the footnotes in the section you're interested in, and then also look at the bibliography in the back. You'll find tons of material there.
Mind War, let me just say my own comment, folks, for all you listening, is one of the most fascinating books that I have, and it's the only book I've read over and over and over again, because each time I seem to learn more, and it makes just so much sense. Literally, I highly recommend it. I don't know what more I could say, and it seems to me here, a lot of people here in this chat have read it, which is great, and Morningstar, too. Okay, here's the next question. In your view, Dr. Aquino, what is this 5G scare about?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in that area. I've heard the term 5G kicked around a little bit, but I haven't paid that much attention to it yet. So I'll have to pass on that question. I just haven't looked into it and don't know.
No problem. Okay, this next question I haven't read, so I'm just going to read it out loud ahead of time to you. Pyramid 7 asks, can you ask him if it were his project to do, which off-grid energy solution would he choose, And can he connect a few old friends for government financing, please?
I assume he's asking about alternative forms of energy, such as the current controversy about the Green New Deal and so on. In other words, can we get off the fossil fuel hookup that we're on right now, and can we get into some alternative system like solar or wind or whatever? And I'll sort of caveat that I'm not an expert in this, and I haven't spent a whole lot of time on it. I'm a social scientist, not a physical one, so I'm not strong on energy conversion in that way. But my impression from everything that I've heard as an interested and reasonably, I guess, intelligent listener is that the current state of affairs for solar and wind is simply not strong enough to replace the demands that we use for fossil fuels right now. Remember also that if you're trying to generate and use electricity for electronic vehicles, there's no get out of jail free here. In other words, there's no free lunch. Something has to generate that power. So you may say, well, I'm not burning fossil fuels in my car, but something is generating the electricity that your car is plugged into, and that something, as often as not, goes back to fossil fuel, coal plants, natural gas plants, most probably to generate that electricity. So you may not see it, but that's a little bit like eating a McDonald's burger and saying, well, I believe in compassion to animals. And I'd never heard an animal, but boy, this hamburger tastes great.
Yeah, agreed.
So this is, yeah. So, and then the second part is, well, where could we possibly go in terms of energy? There is a very interesting area of research that's in its infancy right now, and I'll kind of plant this bug in your audience's ear and say, go do some research on this on your own, because I find it fascinating. It's called the electric universe. And this is an interpretation of cosmology that basically takes the whole Einstein system, which is gravitational-based energy and gravitational-based force factors around the universe, throws it in the trash can and says, no, what we're dealing with is an electromagnetic relationship within the universe that explains everything, and that has plenty of energy that's available from solar radiation between stars and the Earth. And all we have to do is start tapping into this massive amount of interspace electrical energy, and there should be plenty of it to go around, and it won't cost a heck of a lot. We're not talking about solar light photons as much as we're talking about the actual energy that's coming here in terms of solar radiation. So this is a fascinating field, and as I said, generally, if you were to do a search on it, I'd search for electric universe and see what comes up, in your search engine, and follow that around and do some reading on it. It's reached the level where there are some very impressive national conferences that go on each year, and a lot of these have presentations that are on places like YouTube, so you can go listen to some of these lectures and get a feel for it. And I think that if I were going to put my money someplace and say, where is our way out of this in terms of an energy situation for the globe that doesn't kill us, I would look in that direction myself.
Continue, and this is actually a really interesting question here. Do you believe we will see more holograms in war?
I haven't seen a hologram used in war. By this I mean physical war, the conventional war that we're familiar with. I haven't seen any use of holograms to accomplish anything there. That to generate any kind of a hologram, a visual image, you need a controlled atmospheric environment that isn't going to interfere with it. And then you need 3 projectors to give it 3 dimensions. And the 3 projectors have to create a triangulation, like how they were trying to shoot Kennedy, okay? So to create a triangulation, that doesn't really fit on your normal battlefield environment, which is a bunch of people running around in the jungle or in the desert all over the place. Nobody's in easy control of anything, and certainly not enough to put up projectors like that.
Good answer. Good answer.
And either, because you need, yeah.
And the fact that you talked about the three dimensions. Now, yes. The questions are piling up, which is great, Dr. Aquino. People are definitely engaged. This one, I think, has to do more with your political science background, too. Okay, this comes from, let's see here, Lee Veltman. What does he think about this issue with Cambridge Analytics and corruption with big government?
I haven't heard about it.
Well said. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Bill O'Connell, 13. Are Israeli-made, Chinese-manufactured 5G transmitter arrays capable of millimeter wave microwave weaponization and psychotronic brain emulators?
Wow. I'll have to pass on that because I don't know what they are. I do not know the materiel capabilities of the Israeli armed forces. Beyond, obviously, that they have a strong military there and they have nuclear weapons capability. But I haven't looked into it beyond that in terms of their functionality. My impression is that Israel would much rather have other nations do its dirty work for it, including the United States, rather than get its own hands dirty and showing its hands as to what it can and can't do.
And this actually goes back decades, if not half a century plus, of not getting our hands dirty. When I say us, meaning the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Bill O'Connell, 13. What is the capacity for destruction of the USS Zumwalt microwave millimeter wave weapons?
Again, I'm not familiar with that device, so I'd have to pass on that question.
No problem. Hadley Scott McIntyre, how do you project into air an image?
Well, if you're trying to create a three-dimensional image that will make people think that there's something there, like a UFO, for example, you would need a triangulation to create a hologram, as I mentioned earlier, because you have to have three intersecting beams of concentrated light, generally at the laser kind of intensity, so that you don't have it diffused before the three beams hit. But then you need to have those points of triangulation where you can reach a central area between them with those projectors, and those points of triangulation have to be stable. They can't be moving around like even like helicopters or things. You get a very jumbled in and out of focus thing to do that. If in theory you had a stable triangulation environment, then you could create, say, a flying saucer image. And it's possible that using ground-based triangulation and pointing the triangulation up to a point in the air and looking to influence people on the ground, you could very definitely create the image of something like a flying saucer in the air and have it do all the dances and appearing and disappearing and fast changes of direction and all the rest of that, because that's just camera work when you're dealing with three projectors.
I'm going to bypass this next question because a lot of people do know the answer. I mean, if you want, I'll say it out loud. Wasn't there a shill or LARP constantly putting Dr. Aquino down or something? The answer is yes, Douglas Dietrich, because someone else already answered that, and I've seen that myself. Okay, now, here is the next part. Unless you have a comment on that, by the way.
I actually missed the question.
He said, let me find it again. Wasn't there a shill or LARP constantly putting Dr. Aquino down or something? And the answer that I see is yes, Douglas Dietrich.
Yeah, okay, sure, yeah. Well, in a nutshell, I have no idea where Douglas Dietrich came from, but a year or so ago, he appeared out of nowhere and started claiming that he had a history that involved contact with me, which is completely untrue. And so basically, you can just toss him out as a bull thrower, period, exclamation point.
That's right. Okay, now this is again very interesting, and I think this sort of has the idea of the left-hand path a little bit wrong, but maybe I'll leave you to it, Dr. Aquino. Lee Veltman, what does he think about these witches casting spells against Donald Trump?
I haven't heard of that. I don't think it would bother Donald Trump a whole lot because, to get kind of serious about this, if you're trying to use white or black magic to do something to somebody, white magic is, in a nutshell, white magic is prayer to a god that you're using as a personal image to kind of soothe yourself and pretend that you've done something. So white magic is what happens when you go to a Christian church and you go in and you pray for something to happen. Black magic is also misunderstood. You're not praying to demons here to do something that you would normally pray to a beneficent god to do. Black magic, there are two kinds of it, as is defined in Morningstar and also in the Satanic Bible, that I recently published about this. And there is greater black magic and lesser black magic. And these definitions came from Anton LaVey and then later on from myself in the Temple of Set. Greater black magic, to get that out of the way first, that has to do with using the powers of the mind and concentration to explore and strengthen your own psyche, your own sense of being, to take the very vague senses that you have of who and what you are, solidify them, sharpen the focus, and then expand them into their maximum capabilities. That's quite a process, and that's what Morningstar, the book, is all about. Lesser black magic is what your questionnaire is probably, more or less trying to get at. In other words, what could you do to, as a magician, to influence either Donald Trump or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, or anybody else that you feel like. And lesser black magic it's kind of a term that you could actually say it embraces the psychons that are in Mind War, but it also goes somewhat beyond that, because one of the psychons has to do with magic, and the magic that we're talking about is not ooga booga stuff. This is the professional magic that stage magicians are well aware of. I am a life magician member of the Magic Castle in Hollywood, so I know my way around the block here. And we are talking about taking an audience, and the audience can be one person, like a Donald Trump or a Nancy Pelosi, or it can be a room full of people, and you take command of their perception environment, and then you fill that environment with the information that you want them to believe and to manipulate them with. So it isn't that you even have to try to control their thinking. You just create the atmosphere and the information that's going into them, and if you know enough about them, they will draw the conclusions from it that you expect them to do. This is what happens in a stage magic presentation. I mean, a really good one. You're told what you're going to experience. The room is set up, to enhance it. You see it because you're told what you're seeing by the magician. And you also want, to see what you're going to see. So the whole situation dovetails to that. If I were a violent, maniacal war conservative, I would surround somebody like Donald Trump with a lot of very violent war advocating people and have them rag on him and have them control the information that he gets and say, here's the situation, Mr. President, and the only way and if you have a president who's stupid, I won't mention any names, but the initials are, GWB, then you can pull off stuff like this. okay? Because you control what they're thinking. You know how they're going to think. You look at somebody like, Cheney as the vice president and somebody like George Bush as the president. You tell me who's wearing the pants here, okay?
Cheney.
And who knows what's going on.
Yeah.
All right? So the answer is, the answer to your question, you control the environment that the person that you're trying to influence is getting his information from. And if you know enough about the way he thinks, you can practically build the house for him by giving him the materials, and then he'll just do the gluing. That's all.
I have a quick statement real quick that brought up to my attention when you were saying this. What the eyes see and the ears hear, the mind perceives. I think that's very applicable to what you just said. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You see what you want to see. I'll give you a really crushing example that you and I have talked about previously. You take a poll from your audience and you say, how many people believe that the United States landed on the moon in 1969? Almost everybody would say, well, sure we did. We all saw it on TV, the astronauts, we all saw the footage. You had a room full of people all sitting in front of their TV sets at NASA headquarters, And you kind of miss a few things along the side, like Werner von Braun, who is the head of the whole Saturn V project, saying it's absolutely impossible that we could have one Saturn V booster that would get people all the way to the moon and back. You'd need about 5 or 6 of them. And you look at all the photography taken on the surface of the moon with a perfectly ordinary Earth camera and perfectly ordinary Earth film, and it's not a pressurized camera in a pressurized environment, and it's subjected to the huge daytime heat of the moon surface and the huge nighttime cold of the moon surface, and a lot of that unshielded solar radiation. There's no way any Earth film like that is going to function and give you any photographs worth a damn. And then you can go on from there. So, along with everybody else in 1969, I was really thrilled to hear that we'd landed on the moon. And when a few doubting Thomases began to say, oh, we couldn't have done it, or it was Stanley Kubrick, or I said, conspiracy theory, of course we did. No way could we have done pulled a job like that and fooled so many people. Well, the more you look into all the details, which are coming out a whole lot in the last several years, the more you find out that an enormous amount of things make it impossible that we could have done that. Not just a few, an enormous amount. Like the film business, like the rocket business. Like the, how would the lunar lander, having made it down into the moon, if you grant that, you've got a very fast orbiting Earth command ship up there. Will accelerate with one little booster rocket off the surface of the moon, find that fast orbiting thing, catch up to it, match its speed perfectly, and dock with it using one little, air-fueled rocket there.
Like catching a bullet, literally.
I don't think so.
Right?
Yeah. So the, cutting to the chase on this, what I ultimately concluded after doing a lot of back and forth research and being very skeptical, is that we sent Apollos number 11 through 17 up into Earth orbit. They hung up in Earth orbit for the required number of days, and then they came back down to Earth, stating that they had done a moon trip. And all of the moon sequences were actually shot on sound stages here on Earth. And we weren't looking for this at the time, of course, as being some kind of a big psyop stunt. And of course, we all bought it. I bought it. You bought it. Your audience probably bought it. Now, when you're looking at this stuff, you're beginning to say, oops, what happened to my wallet here,
Yeah.
So there's an example to you, and of the United States feeling that it had to make a big statement, a big propaganda statement, and managing to pull it off, and finding out that people wanted so badly to believe in it that they didn't even have to sell it that hard, and that people weren't looking for the mistakes.
Now, this is from the Super Chat. These are just actual comments for you, and I think it's very appropriate to tell you, especially since this person has, I'll just read it. Please tell Dr. Aquino that I appreciate his sharing of knowledge. He didn't need to do this. Dr. Aquino chose this. Thank you so much, Dr. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino. I probably missed something. Then he goes on to say, I don't believe DDD, meaning Douglas Dietrich, whatever the middle name is. And the other part is read Mind War, started Morningstar. I thought that was very, very on the point. And yeah, as you could tell, this is definitely someone who has read Mind War and absorbed the material and realized the genius you truly are. And you really are, just to set the record straight for everybody out there who also agrees with me, by the way.
Well, Mind War was a book that I wrote in 2012 and updated it in 2016. And the reason for this was that I had spent a total of 40 years as a PSYOP officer in the U.S. government, in the U.S. Army. And I was very frustrated with the fact that we were still in the middle of all these, what I call phys wars, in other words, physical wars all over the planet. There's a lot of bloodshed going on, and I kept saying to myself, if we're so damn smart as a species that we can make it to the moon, chuckle, chuckle. Now, I mean, if we're so damn smart as a species, then how come we are still hitting each other over the head with clubs, beating each other to death, destroying each other's lifestyles? Can't we solve our problems in a more sensible way than this? And it seemed to me that the way out was through a much greater development of PSYOP. But PSYOP did not work for us the way we applied it up through World War II and Vietnam very well. And after the research that I did, I concluded that the reason is because we concentrated on the 5% of the brain's processing power that takes place at the conscious level. That is also, of course, what stage magicians will use, because it's your present perceptions. It has a very short retention span, which is why your memory is the shortest in this area of what we call algorithmic thinking at Fort Bragg. And it also does not, thank you, the rightness or wrongness of the overall situation, or even the truthness or falsity of it. That all takes place in the 95% of your thought processing that happens at the subconscious level, which is, again, according to our lexicon at Fort Bragg, pattern thinking. And again, my book has a lot of bibliographical entries on all this, so you can chase this back as much as you like. Pattern thinking are the reality perceptions that you develop all through life, lesser or greater ones, that tell you whether, when you apply these patterns to anything that you look at, anything you think about, to decide sort of what's going to be the truth and what's going to be the falseness of it, and what's going to be the goodness and badness of it. So what you need to do is to clear away as much garbage as possible from the patterns of people's thinking and get them thinking coherently at that level, and basically cleaning up their patterns. And if you have people with a good set of clear perceptive patterns as to reality, truth, falsehood, these basic values, then you can practically sit back in your armchair and leave them alone, and they should, according to Plato anyway, head in the direction of reasoned, coherent, sensible, positive, cooperative solutions to problems. That's what the Mind War program is all about. That's what the Mind War book is advocating, is getting at these patterns, clearing the garbage out of them, and allowing people then to use this sort of clear atmosphere that you're trying to get for them to address these situations, which in an unadjusted situation just drive them into big fistfights. As you can see, this has to do with the physical, what we call the processing or thought architecture. The reason I wrote the book Morningstar, since you mentioned that, is that Mind war specifically does not have anything to do with the metaphysical aspect of human thought when we're getting into the mind-body, differences and so on. Mind war specifically is talking about your brain as a machine, and the way that stuff that's coming into this machine every split second of every day is governing your perceptions and your thoughts. It does not address, for want of a better term, the human soul. So when, as a magician, as an initiate, people were asking me, well, what about that? I said, that doesn't have anything to do with stopping wars on this planet that people are involved with. But if you want me to tell you everything that I've learned about the human soul, or souls as it were, I'll do a book on that. And that's what Morningstar is. It's a handbook concerning the metaphysical aspects of your consciousness and your soul, or souls as they were. That's the difference between those two books. The third one in the series is called Findfar, F-I-N-D-F-A-R, and that is sort of a sequel and an expansion on mind war, but it has to do with the practical application of mind war in real-world situations, identifying some real-world circumstances, and also discussing in more detail the concept of forecasting, social forecasting, and the reverse engineering of mind war campaigns based upon social forecasting models. So it's more of a practical application of that. And those are those three books.
Top of those three books, you've written several. The recent book you wrote in the revision to the Satanic Bible. You have 2 books on Temple of Set, 2 books on Church of Satan. Am I missing any?
Total of about 16 books, wow. I think, at this point. And the easiest way to get a list of them is to just go onto Amazon, do a search for the author, Michael Aquino, and you'll see a list 2 pages long of all of my books, all of which are in print and available on Amazon. And you click on any one of those, it'll take it to its page. You can use the feature that gives you a look inside, so you can check out the table of contents and see what the book's about. And that's the easy way to get an idea of what's in each book and whether you are interested in it.
Now, I'm going to continue with the questions so everyone has a chance here to have access to you since one of the phone lines is down. This is from Lasha Senyak. Does Dr. Aquino think that what destroyed the atmosphere on Mars was actually an electromagnetic event? For instance, if a planet or moon came close to Mars and triggered massive electrical events?
I don't know off the top of my head if Mars had an atmosphere that was destroyed. As I said, I'm not an astronomer and haven't spent that much time focused on it. I would again point you in the direction that I mentioned earlier. Go Google that thing called Electrical Universe and follow some of the leads that talks about, because that says and I'm going to be somewhat crude about this, but it says that the planetary systems and the solar systems are all hooked up together in a large set of electromagnetic fields, and that the movements of these fields are what pretty much determines the layout of things and what hangs together and what doesn't. The Earth, for example, as I'm sure everybody knows here, is a big electromagnet. We've got these magnetic poles, and one of the rather peculiar things that's going on is that the magnetic poles are not like the physical poles. The magnetic poles move around, and they have been moving around particularly since about the year 2000. So they are quite distant at this point from the physical poles, the north-south poles of the planet. And there have been theories, and I can't go beyond the theory word on this right now, that it has happened in history that the poles have actually reversed their polarities in a kind of a sudden way, meaning real fast, not slow and lugubriously like the movement of the poles, but I mean just a sudden shift in them. And that this accounts for some of the big catastrophes in history that have put the Earth on its heel, like the elimination of the dinosaurs and so on. So I'll let people follow that one on their own. But yes, once you look at the electrical theory of the universe, you'll find that the amount of things that are going on up there that impact not just the physical planet, of course, but everybody living on it, is amazing. Even back in the 60s and 70s, there was a book called, I think it's Cycles of Heaven, I believe it was called, that had to do with, it's in the bibliography in Mind War. It has to do with all the physical electromagnetic forces from the spectrum that are impacting human beings on this planet and how they control the way we think and act and live and our lifespans and all the rest of it. So there's an enormous amount of stuff here that we're just beginning to get into the surface of. And yes, so I would go in that direction concerning the Mars question. Look up Electrical Universe, and once you're in there, start looking around for Mars, and I think you'll find a lot of interesting stuff.
Now, for all those listening and in the chat, those with super chat, of course, I'm going to give first priority. Then I'll come back to the other people's questions so everyone has a chance to ask what you wanted to ask Dr. Aquino. Lars, first 7 years of our life, the foundation of our subconscious, question mark?
I don't know that I would narrow it down. The patterns that make up our subconscious thinking, that our perceptions of realities, are constantly being affected by what we see and what we process through our bodies at all times. So I've definitely seen people's thought patterns and their pattern thinking levels change, definitely past age 7. So I don't think that there's anything magical in that first time period. I didn't know in my own perceptions of reality or truth, falsehood at or near age 7 or even thereafter into my teen years. I was just sort of an open book, kind of getting additional information stuffed into me all the time. But if anything, I simply didn't know what to make of all this because I wasn't at this level of experience or research. I was just absorbing stuff, like everybody else does here, and trying to make sense of it. And of course, when you're being socialized, you're not doing it in a vacuum. Your family is telling you what is real and what's not. The government's telling you what's real and what's not. The church is telling you what's real and what's not. And,
schools?
And you're being kind of led around schools, yes, of course. So you're putting a lot of trust in all these people that they're not going to be bullshitting you. And to some extent, you get some good conscientious teachers. You can go back in your own history and you can probably pick out the ones who you jerk your ass retroactively and identify them pretty clearly when you look back on it now.
Now, X Digital asks, since he is honest about the moon landing, another easy, honest question. What is the country that benefits most from all the wars in the Middle East and 9/11?
Well, I would say different countries for different reasons, but what happened after 9/11 was that the Middle East got violently destabilized. You had some fairly cohesive governments that were in place down there, and this isn't to say that some of them were good and some of them were bad. Yes, they had good and bad countries and good and bad governments, and nobody had a lock on virtue down there any more than we do over here, really, for that matter. But the country at that time, at the time of the turn of the century there, that had the most to gain immediately from a destabilization was Israel. The reason is that Israel felt itself to be surrounded by people who hated it and wanted it out of existence. And to some extent, it still feels that way. It's probably the world's most paranoid country. It was facing a couple of strong enemies at that time, mainly Iraq and Iran, and it really would much rather have had those go back to the period of time previous to that, when the Iraq-Iran war was on and when they were fighting each other. But the one that was closer to them, of course, was Iraq, and if nothing else, they wanted Saddam Hussein's Iraq put out of business.
For money, I would think. We have a super chat comment, Dr. Aquino. I'm going to read it for you. Long live Dr. Aquino. I agree. That's from Lars Saturn. Okay, here's the next question. You still with us, Dr. Aquino? Uh-oh. Did we lose our guest? Dr. Aquino. Let's make sure you're still on, my friend. You got lots of questions in chat here. Let's find out. We lost him. Hold on a second, folks. We are going to bring him right back. I know you guys have a lot of questions, and I'm actually getting a hold of the station owner to bring him back right now. Let's see here, folks. This is the problem, I guess you could say, when I don't have the ability to bring him on myself. Otherwise, I would have just redialed. But hang tight. He will be back on right now. And I know your questions and comments are lining up. I know this was a very special show that you guys and gals wanted. And that is why he is here. So hang tight for a quick second as we get a hold of Dr. Michael Aquino, PhD. And let me see if I can do something on my end to bring him back. Let's see if this will work. And if not, it's going to require the station owner. So let me call the station owner real quick, folks. I'm going to put him on speaker so you guys can hear. We're calling Joe Montaldo. Oh, we got you back, Dr. Aquino. Okay, good. We thought we lost you for a second. We were like, uh-oh. You are back. Okay, did you hear what Lars Saturn said? Long live Dr. Aquino. That was part of the super chat, and I agree with that statement. That's from, like I said, Lars. Okay, now, let's see here. More from another question here. First 7 years, we already mentioned the first 7 years. You mentioned about Plato. Was he consulted, meaning you, during the development of Google's deep
The person
mind?
you have dialed can't take your call now. At the tone, please record your message. When you have finished recording, simply hang up
folks.
or press the pound key for further options.
Hang tight, friends, and I will bring everybody back, and let's see what we can do to bring back our guest, since we are still streaming.
To mark your message.
Let's call again Joseph here. Joe Montaldo, buddy, bring back our guest. All right, folks, hang tight here. As you know, we're still streaming live here, except it's only my voice you can hear until we bring back Dr. Aquino. Let's see if if I join this, if it's not going straight to his voicemail, and see what happens.
To mark your message urgent, press 2. To mark your
Joe,
message
you with us, buddy?
press 3. To send your message
We gotta disconnect our guest.
That's your guest right there. They won't, for some reason, they're not answering the phone.
Your message has
can
been
you try
sent.
again,
To send
Joe?
a message to another subscriber,
How
enter
do I
the
hang
area
that
code
up?
and phone number of that subscriber, or press the star key.
There you go. Let's bring him back. For a quick second, he was back. I wonder if people are wanting for, not people in the chat, of course, trying to suppress this knowledge. I could see why.
No, these just sounds like a phone issue here.
Yeah.
The network's solid. I'm looking at the network. It's all
And
solid.
I'm still streaming live, folks, and see you here. Now you get to hear Joe Montaldo, which I know you find
Let's
folks
try
at
it again. Oops,
UPRN.
nope, that ain't gonna work like that. Sorry, guys.
And
I
in
want
the
to get to the old
meantime,
dial pad thing.
I'm looking at other questions here. Let's find out here.
Have you been probed by an alien?
Hello?
Yes,
we go.
Dr. Aquino, we got you back. We lost you a couple times here. Okay, did
Somebody
you hear?
doesn't want me answering that question.
It's like, yes, exactly. That's what I was trying to think. That's probably Google, right? Literally, it has to be Google. So if you recall the question, it was he consulted during the development of Google's deep mind?
No.
Okay, that's an easy answer. Okay.
I don't even know what it is. The most that I know about Google is that's what I use as a search engine, but I'm not familiar with them beyond that.
Pyramid 7 asks, what audible frequencies or light spectrum frequencies effectively heal, specifically neural pathway regeneration?
Short answer is none of them in and of themselves, because we're talking about different building blocks there. The only thing that these frequency waves do, as far as my research has gone and what I've actually had practical experience in, is the coherence and calming of your thought processes, as I said, using that term thought architecture. So if you blanket a room, for example, with alpha, then you'll get relaxed, intelligent, smart thinking that's relatively free of coherent, angry, confused thoughts. Whereas if you do the same room with something like beta, you'll create the exact opposite kind of an atmosphere, and get more jumpy antagonism, more energetic kinds of fast conclusion sort of thinking.
Now, this is someone, I would have thought they would have seen, especially reading the biography. So we'll just address this before we go back to the people who clearly know who you are, who've read your readings or your writings, and who have followed you for years. This is someone who is definitely not known. Let me find the question exactly. This comes from Lasha. And where is your question, Lasha? Essentially, she was asking about if you are a Satanist or something.
Up through my undergraduate years at college, I was not affiliated with any one church of any sort. By the time I was through college, I had dispensed with conventional religions with the same attitude that I dispensed with Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, that they were interesting but essentially silly myths that didn't deserve belief. So I was an existentialist at that point. That would have been 1967, 68. At that point, by sheer accident, I bumped into Anton LaVey in the Church of Satan. I attended a couple of his lectures, corresponded with him over the next year or so, decided that far from being just a showman or a modern-day Emperor Norton or a clown of any sort, that he actually was a very serious and very thoughtful person, and he just might have an interesting window on reality and the way to address it. So in 1969, I joined the Church of Satan. A year later, I was ordained to the Satanic priesthood, and by 1975, I was the second most senior official in the church, next to Anton himself. In 1975, he made a decision to essentially shut down the Church of Satan as a functioning religion, and to change it into a de facto personal glamorization organization for himself. I and other members of the Satanic priesthood at that point disagreed with that. We felt that it was a rejection of the true purpose and raison d'etre, so to speak, of the Church of Satan and of Satan. And therefore we left to continue it, and as a result of a magical working at that time that I went through the North Solstice of 1975, we founded the Temple of Set, which has basically incorporated as a California nonprofit religion that same year, has remained in existence ever since then and continued to grow exponentially since then, which took the adventure that we were involved in completely out of the Judeo-Christian metaphor of Satanism, of Judeo-Christian myth labels, and took it back to the ancient Egyptian, which is why we use those terms and those technologies in our initiatory system. So you might say that we just cleared the remaining Judeo-Christian garbage out of what we were talking about then, and went back to the primal sources, which proved to be much more clear and much more illuminating, but also requires a commitment on the individual initiatory level which is very intense, a little bit like what Cain ran into in Kung Fu when he approached the Shaolin monastery, if you can remember that. So when I recently rewrote or updated the Satanic Bible, because that would be the next question, well, if you're not a Satanist anymore and you're a Setian, then why did you update the Satanic Bible? My response to that is that in the West here, Judeo-Christianity is still the overwhelming paradigm for the way people view metaphysical questions. And therefore, it's the way that if you're going to construct a mass religious system, a teaching system, it's the easiest and most easy to understand and coherent for most people to begin with and to use. And that's why I decided to update that volume and to use that metaphor. But the same book makes it quite clear that this is, again, for purposes of communicating with this audience, and is not a completely in-depth book that takes you into a full initiatory personal experience. So today, from 1975 on, I have been a Setian, a priest of Set, and still am today.
Good answer. And I'm sure people will follow up on that question, and I know a lot more, but I'm just going to go on with the next question, if you don't mind, Dr. Aquino, since they are piling up, by the way. In your view, what is the Luciferian philosophy?
I don't know of a Luciferian philosophy by that name. I know that Lucifer was a Roman term. You know, Lucifer, the light source or light bearer, a Roman god, roughly comparable to somebody like the Greek Prometheus, and also used to identify the morning star or Venus as a heavenly body. And in occult lingo, you have some words that are thrown around today pretty loosely. Another one, of course, is things like Illuminati, and of course Luciferian, you know, is another one of these, or reptilian is another one, you know, that's thrown around without a whole lot of reasoning and logic behind it. So I would say that if you are a student of theosophy, meaning Helena Blavatsky's system, she liked to refer to her inspirational sources as Luciferian, meaning sort of the good supernatural prince of darkness as opposed to the bad one, because she didn't want to be called a Satanist, but she didn't mind being called a Luciferian. It was sort of like being called a Promethean, but still hanging on to the Judeo-Christian language. So today, if you see the word Luciferian, it's generally in a pretty casual, pretty sloppy sense of people who are trying to use it as a sort of a quasi-satanic term. You'll notice that in the Satanic Bible there are 4 internal books: Satan, Lucifer, Belial, and Leviathan. I mentioned in this new edition, which Anton didn't in the earlier one, where these came from. They came from MacGregor Mather's translation of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, which was an old textbook that he took and translated from the French. And in there, without any particular explanation, those 4 names were identified as the 4 crown princes of hell: Satan, Lucifer, Belial, and Leviathan. Actually, if you really want to do some serious research on it, Satan, of course, is the Judeo-Christian demon. Lucifer is the Roman god, who was somewhat later used by some Christians, like John Milton, to identify and name Satan before he fell from heaven. Belial is a corruption of Baal, who was a Near Eastern Canaanite god, and Leviathan was a big fish who had nothing to do with any demonic presence at all. So in terms of their historical usage, they all sort of fall apart. They were just used in the Satanic Bible because MacGregor Mathers used them, and Anton felt, well, so okay, that's a good way for me to divide up this thing too.
Now, before I get to, actually, you know what? Since this person is in Super Chat, I'm going to ask it first before I ask to go on further about Temple of Set. Now, this is about pentagram. To make the pentagram, Venus, Earth, and the Sun alive 5 times. Is this true?
I've never heard that. I've never heard that expression or formula before. I mean, the pentagram is a marvelous figure with a lot of interesting characteristics. Of course, most essentially, it's practically lousy with the golden ratio because all of its arms crisscross each other in the golden ratio. And a very wonderful thing for your readers to do to have some fun with this is to go on YouTube and look up the old Walt Disney cartoon called Donald in Math Magic Land. And that's a very fun thing that Walt Disney put together back in the 50s with Donald Duck exploring some of the mysteries of Pythagoreanism, including the ratios of the pentagram and the golden ratios that appeared all through history in the works of the great masters and the architecture of the Parthenon and so on. So look that up and you'll have a lot of fun looking up the pentagram with that one. And of course there's an enormous amount of literature. And I go into this in considerable detail in books such as Illuminank, ILLUMINANX, Illuminank, which was a critique of right-hand path initiatory religion that I wrote a couple of years ago, but has a very extensive appendix there, which is also in my Temple of Set books, that has to do with the significance of the pentagram and its construction and use in magic and history.
Did you know that, I'm sure you do since you were in the U.S. Army, the Medal of Honor itself is a pentagram?
Yeah, well, not quite. In other words, if you look at it, it's fat. It isn't a perfect pentagram, but yes, it's a 5-pointed star, but they're kind of fat 5 points, so it isn't a perfect, clear pentagram. If you want a perfect, clear pentagram, you'd have to go to the silver star or the bronze star, which I happen to have.
Ah, interesting. Now, this is the other... Actually, real quick, while we're on this, Dr. Aquino, can we talk about what medals you said the silver star, or you said you have the bronze star, right?
I have the bronze star. Mm-hmm.
Throughout your career in the military, what other medals have you accumulated?
5 rows of them, I guess, on my fruit salad, and I have, let's see, Bronze Star, Army Meritorious Service Medal, the Air Medal, which is sort of the aerial combat version of the Bronze Star, 3 awards of the Army Commendation Medal, and then about 10 or 11 service medals below that one.
Wow.
In terms of badges, the parachutist badge, paratrooper, Special Forces tab as a Green Beret, and also the Air and Space Missile badge awarded by the U.S. Air Force to the first officers in the U.S. Army who became Army space officers through the Joint U.S. Air Force Army program back in 1990.
That's actually, you're very, very decorated to have that many medals, and I would just imagine you in full military garb with all your medals, with your ribbons. That'd be just amazing. And you know what? I have to say, from one skydiver to another, hey, blue skies. That's something I know, I've already known offhand, but for those of you who are listening to this who didn't know, Dr. Aquino also was in the Special Forces and also was a parachutist. And now you know that I am one too, and I'm sure you folks have heard about this. Okay, let's see here too. Oh, someone has a nice comment. He says, he's a badass. I had no idea. I definitely agree with that. You are. Okay, let's see who else here.
Let's put it this way, as I'm sure you can also testify, when you're about to go up in the airplane for your first parachute jump, you're absolutely scared out of your ass. And when you land on the ground and you're in one piece, you stand up and you say, "Hey, John fucking Wayne."
That's true. That's true. Now, here is an interesting question. What is the difference between Satan and Set?
Satan is a Judeo-Christian mythological construct that was in the Old Testament. I sort of say it this way: he was the worst possible thing that you can imagine, which is he was an art critic. He showed up as an angel of God's who told God that he'd sort of overstepped himself in creating humanity, and he was going to show him what a mistake he made by throwing some obstacles in the faces of people like Job, to trip him up and basically cause trouble and make God realize what a mistake this was. So that was the Old Testament version of Satan. By the time we get around to the New Testament, he's not an art critic anymore. Now he's sort of been promoted to the personification of all evil. And this also introduces one of the quandaries that you run into in Christianity, because Satan in Christianity is much more powerful, sometimes called the Lord of this world, as it were, and people can't understand why, if you have a supposedly good God, or Jehovah, whatever, that he could allow so much evil to be in the hands of this very powerful devil character. That's a question that Christian theologians just throw up their hands and say, well, that's obviously beyond us. We just have to trust in God that he has his reasons for doing this. But that's the history of the term Satan. Set is an Egyptian term that goes back to the pre-dynastic era. And if you know anything about Egyptian hieroglyphs, you know that they didn't have any vowels. So what you have are the consonants ST. And you can plug in almost any vowel between them, Sat or Set or Sut or Seth or whatever you like to fill it in for talking purposes. We in the Temple of Set have always used the term Set as being the most colloquial one, S-E-T. And here you have one of the two pre-dynastic original gods of the Egyptian system, because that was originally a binary astronomical system involving the great celestial Horus as the principle of daytime and nature, what we would call the objective universe, and against that of Set, which is the nighttime circumpolar stellar presence. And that original system, which you see kind of reflections of that in things like Yang and Yin and other dualisms, but it was a kind of a juxtaposed system as opposed to a moral kind of system. And later on, it got diffused into various mass cults in dynastic Egypt, and Set was considered to be good in some of them, such as the priesthood of Set, and he was also considered to be bad in others, like the Osiris cult, which was a life after death one. Most people think of Egyptology in terms of the Osiris cult, which is what we got from Plutarch, who was the last person that wrote all this stuff down. But that was actually one of about 10 or 20 different cult systems that were going on in Egypt. So once you actually get into Egyptology, you'll find that none of these Egyptian gods, or Neteru, as we call them more precisely, were very simple. They all had different interpretations and perceptions based on the cult center in question.
Why is the Congressional Medal of Honor weird to the many? I'm reading it word for word, Dr. Aquino.
Weird?
That's what I see.
I don't understand that. Yeah, I don't understand that. I mean, it's the highest medal for valor in the United States, and I don't know anything weird about it.
I'm asking that, Lars, if you could please rephrase that question, and I will absolutely ask it. Okay, now, this is an interesting one. I haven't heard this one before, Dr. Aquino. Pyramid 7 wants to know, is it true that Dr. Aquino was/is in charge of Wikipedia?
No. And as a matter of fact, you won't find a Wikipedia page on me because I was having such trouble with the page that was somebody else created on me, because it was basically being used for runaway character assassination. And I couldn't correct it because the minute I tried to, somebody would just run in roughshod and immediately put all the slander on it up again. And I just, went to the Wikipedia editors and I said, look, I can't handle this. Don't want to spend the rest of my time trying to deal with this. Can you help me? And they said, well, we have a policy at Wikipedia against slandering living individuals. So on that basis of that policy, would you like us just to remove the page on you? And I said, I would appreciate it. So that's why there's no page on me.
Interesting. Very interesting. I didn't know that story. Let's see here. Okay, this is more of a statement. Bill O'Connell, 13, and I'm just reading it. So, Bill, here we go. I may have been to hell several times and gave no respect to the devil, etc. When asleep, follow the devil to the worst, darkest part of hell, and grabbing him by the throat and having words with the miserable SOB. I don't know what to say, but that's, I read it.
Gee, I don't know what to say to that, except that, again, that the devil, the Christian devil, which is what most people think of when they think in terms of Satan, is, of course, mythologized as being the personification of everything nasty, dirty, and destructive. But that's certainly not the way the Church of Satan perceived him. We perceived him in a Promethean sense as being the illumination and the source of our sense of self-realization, and if anything, an encouragement towards the deification of the self that Plato was advocating when he was talking about the agathon, the quest for the good with the capital G. So the Church of Satan wound up in the very odd situation of being a very moral institution, as is the Temple of Set, but it places the responsibility for this squarely on the shoulders of each individual. It does not say that you're going to achieve goodness by obeying this or that god, or that you are going to be bad because you disobey the god. You have to take full responsibility for your judgments yourself, and because of that full responsibility, you can't say the devil made me do it. You can't say, well, it's because I'm being influenced or this or that. You have to take the whole load on your personal karmic shoulders, as it will, and deal with it. And that's, lesson number one when people joined the Church of Satan, and still is lesson number one in the Temple of Set. So if anything, we wound up being more moral than the Boy Scouts of America, which I was the national commander of the Eagle Scout Society the year before I joined the Church of Satan. People ask me about that, and I say, yeah, I went from being the number one Eagle Scout in the country to an even higher standard of morality in the Church of Satan. And they say, what? And that's the explanation.
Now, going back to that question about the pentagram, Lars was able to add to it. So I'm going to reread the question. Why is the Congressional Medal of Honor weird to the many? And the extra part of it is inverted pentagram. May think that's weird. I don't. Many think that's weird. And that goes back to what I was mentioning earlier, the fact that it does have the 5 pointed stars and it's inverted.
Yeah. I don't know where the design of it came from, although since it has a metal device that it hangs from that I think has the word valor on it, VALOR, if you're going to suspend a 5-pointed star from that horizontal bar, the easiest way to do it is by having 2 of the points up so that you can have hooks, to attach it to it. So it might have been something as simple as that, but again, you're not talking about a perfect pentagram here because it's a fat star. The lines don't line up in straight across pentagram lines. It's just a 5-pointed fat star with Minerva's head in the middle.
Now, this is from the super chat.
If it had a goat's head in the middle, he might have something. Right?
That's true, right? Okay, these are just 2 comments for you. 1, intellect. That's right. Dr. Aquino has a lot of intellect. That's why I say he's one of the most intelligent people walking this planet today. So we are blessed. Now, the other part is lead by example. Exactly what you just said. Take responsibility for yourselves, do your own, make your own judgments, and lead by example. I couldn't agree with that more. What do you say about that?
Well, as I said previously, that's been the catchword of both the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set. The Church of Satan up to 1975, and then the Temple of Set since then, is personal responsibility for your judgments, and that also means before you make those judgments, you have, of course, a responsibility to do as much research into your fact gathering as you can so that you make your decisions on good information and not on prejudices, and biases. Again, that goes kind of back to that business that I was talking about in terms of pattern thinking, because if you have a bunch of bad patterns that you were educated or socialized into as a kid or indoctrinated into along the way, and then you say, well, I'm going to behave good and I'm going to do it on the basis of these patterns that I have, you can wind up butchering a whole lot of people and still thinking of yourself as good. There's this old problem with this notion of goodness that everybody thinks that they have some kind of justification for what they're doing. To them it seems good. So you have to take that step back and look at the basis for your decisions as to goodness and badness and say, are these really valid? Can I make my decisions based on these? So we have to encourage that kind of an inward looking into your value system before you start actually reaching the point of making judgments.
Now, this is coming from left field. Joseph Correa, I hope I said that properly, I hope it's Correa, Correa. What are the gray aliens, and does Dr. Aquino have any idea why they're interacting with humans?
Okay, I am going to get myself into a lot of trouble here, but I might as well take the plunge. Let's just go to the question, are there aliens on Earth right now, such as the Greys or the rest of it, or and are UFOs visiting us from other planets or star systems? I'm going to have to be very careful with how I phrase this here, and the reason I say this is because I finished off my military career as one of the Army's first Joint Space Intelligence Officers, which was an MOS of 35B, which is Strategic Intelligence, with the 3Y suffix, which is space activities. One of a handful of people who held that in my last several years, from 1990 to 1994, when I was assigned to J2X of U.S. Space Command headquarters at Peterson Air Force Base, which is the intelligence headquarters part of U.S. Space Command. Incidentally, if you look up U.S. Space Command today, you won't find it because that designation has been deleted, and what was the U.S. Space Command has now been absorbed into a new name, being U.S. Northern Command, in which the space activities part of it is not so easily identifiable. But back then, 1990 to 94, it was the U.S. Space Command, and I was in J2X of its intelligence division. Now, what's funny here is that J2 stands for joint, that's what the J is for. In the normal Army, you would see G for General Staff. If it's a joint headquarters, like Army, Navy, Air Force, or a combined command, it becomes J, and the number 2 stands for the intelligence part, so that's J2. The X part of it was the specific section or job that I had, and this is what's funny. That had to do specifically with evaluations of phenomena that didn't fit into normal J2 informational activities, such as U.S. and foreign aircraft coming into the radar blanket that NORAD, which was the system that we used, was detecting. So when you see a series like X-Files on TV and you say, well, this has to do with UFOs, the funny thing is it did. Okay, I was the ex-officer from 1990 to 1994 at U.S. Space Command. And all these things came across my desk. And what these things were is the following, that at Cheyenne Mountain, where they had the NORAD war room, such as it is, or the command room, they tracked everything that came into U.S. and Canadian airspace, because the original reason that NORAD was set up was, of course, to detect and defend against Soviet ICBM attacks over the pole. But the blanket grew over the years to where everything in the space over these two countries, from the U.S. southern border on north, was covered in the NORAD blanket and would be picked up. And anything that could be identified as an Earth aircraft of some sort would immediately be plotted and checked against normal flight plans and information like that, and then discounted, or known missile launches and things like that. But there was a lot of stuff that went on and off the radar scope there that we didn't know anything about, that came on and then went off again, or that came on and went through it at a rate of speed much too high for normal phenomena, and then went off it. And a lot of that could be discounted after a while as space junk, or meteors, or other normal extraterrestrial natural phenomena like that. But there was always the question mark, and if anything seemed to be behaving at all like it might be rational in some way, there'd be a printout, and they'd throw it on my desk, and they'd say, evaluate this and tell us if we have to get excited about this or not. And I didn't see anything in those 4 years that made me think that I had to pick up the red phone and call somebody, because it was all just in and out and through and zip, and that was pretty much it. So if you're asking me, did somebody drop a tail fin or something from a UFO on my desk, I'd have to say no. At the same time, exactly the extent of what I looked at there gets up into the ultra-classified level, because in the United States we have the normal classifications of confidential, secret, and top secret, and then above top secret you have top secret special intelligence access, or SIA, and this gets into the compartments, such as one that I can disclose that used to be non-disclosable, but I can't discuss the contents, but at least the name is there, and that's TK, or Talent Keyhole, which has to do with intelligence from our Earth satellite system, for which I was cleared. Now, the X stuff, so as I said, all came across my desk as stuff under the TK program, but also because anything that was unknown also had a compartment called MJ, which I think is probably the actual real-world basis for when people have talked about this thing called Majestic 12 and so on as being a space program or space intelligence program. That's probably where it got started, but it was basically just a classification and a compartment for looking at information and trying to decide whether or not this was something to worry about. And as I said, we didn't reach the worry about level there. That comes back to the question of, are there aliens who actually have made it here, who are tromping around down here as grays or anything else? There's a very interesting question as to where all of the elements in human DNA come from, because, as you know, there are some pretty interesting differences between us and the rest of the ape family. And I'll leave that as an open question because I'm not that much of a geneticist, but I'll tell you this. In terms of what we were looking at in the U.S. Space Command, Einsteinian space-time, I'm sorry to say this, Einsteinian space-time is basically bullshit. And the reason I say that, if you want a sort of an unclassified explanation of this, take a look in my book, Find Far, because I go a lot into the aspect of dimensions and space-time in there. But there is nothing sacred about 186,000 miles per second, except that it happens to be the rate of particles in an electromagnetic system. However, it's a rate of movement of particles in an electromagnetic system relative to a point of departure and a point of perception, which can be in motion themselves. That's the true meaning of the fourth dimension. Dimensions 1, 2, 3 have to do with a given object in objective universal space, occupying a specific displacement in that space. And dimension 4 has to do with its duration as a three-dimensional object compared to some other point of reference, which means its movement over time. And that's what dimension 4 is. So Dr. J exists as a dimension 3 object, but he's also moving around in dimension 4 by being Dr. J from moment to moment to moment to moment, versus all the other things that we measure him against, like the existence of the planet that he's walking on and so on. Now, that being the case, forget about the notion of ultra-dimensional travel between star systems, such as you've led to believe in some sci-fi gimmicks. There's no such thing as wormholes. There's no such thing as traveling here by dimensional warps and that kind of thing. It is completely possible to get into a spaceship on Alpha Centauri, put your foot on the gas pedal, and hold it there and go up to 186,000 miles per second and keep accelerating until you reach a speed which would give you real-time access to the planet Earth. The problem is that the moment that you go beyond that 186,000 miles per second versus anything around you, you lose your ability through your instruments to take bearings on them using the electromagnetic spectrum. So you lose the ability to check on where you are, because everything in front of you gets compressed to zero minus. Everything behind you just falls back behind you, and everything to your sides becomes an incomprehensible blur. So unless you take a very accurate guess from Alpha Centauri and say, if I accelerate to this such and such, and I point myself in this direction, and then I lift off my foot on the gas and put on the brakes here, poof, there's Earth. That's a pretty big piece of assumption about your ability to be perfect. And I don't think we were able to convince ourselves that even a very advanced system could do something like that. But because of that, any notion that starships from some other world or planet could appear here sort of by magic from another dimensional and then pop back into it just doesn't hold water, isn't there. You'd either have to have people who physically got here in real time from another planet or star system, or not. And we didn't see it. Okay? That would be my answer to that.
Good answer. Definitely good answer. I know, and someone here just wrote, as a matter of fact, that you're talking Morningstar now, and I like to want to give that person a shout out for the, of course, super chat. Now we have 15 minutes left, and we have a few questions, Dr. Aquino. But real quick, there is someone who has written a statement here. It's actually 3. I'm going to merge them into one, that I believe this person is not fully aware of what the left-hand path really is. The first part is, I don't think the Satanists, this is by Lasha Senyak, I don't think the Satanists are taking responsibility for themselves at all. They are always looking for power outside of themselves and blaming others for their own problems. Can't learn that way. The second part, she says, is that, it just dawned on me, both the Satanists and the military worship the material world. And the third part is, being smart doesn't make you nice. So yeah, you can be dark and enlightened very easily.
Okay, I don't, she doesn't name any names, but I don't know an authentic Satanist, and I say authentic, who worships material avarice I guess, in that way, or is mean for the sake of being mean, if you want to look at it that way. As I mentioned, almost to our surprise, when I encountered Anton LaVey in the Church of Satan way back in those days, and we were talking about primitive Satanism before we even got to the Temple of Set level, Anton was a very, very conscientious, very moral, very kind, very compassionate gentleman. He had to play himself in interviews and things as being a bit of a Mephistophelian, clown, and he would occasionally say mischievous things. But as an individual, he was very, very much of a gentleman, very soft-hearted and very nice. And one of the reasons that he got interested in this whole business of Satanism to begin with was his bitterness about the corruption and hypocrisy that he saw in society around him. And he said, this is a lousy situation, and it needs all these conventional religions are doing nothing but pious rationalizations of it, and we need something that calls a spade and says, listen, if you're bad, you're fucking bad, and it's your own damn fault, and if you want to be that way, okay, you can be that way, but then take responsibility for it. And if you're going to be good, then you have the even greater responsibility of having to learn what the good is and then getting on with doing that. So I haven't met an authentic Satanist that I would call a bad person. If anything, quite the contrary. I'd see a lot of people in conventional religion that I would consider to be violent hypocrites and very stupid ones, from the Pope on down, who will be very pious about this and that and the other thing, and then can easily turn their cheek to all kinds of suffering and misdeeds that are going on in their own organization or in the outside world, and say, well, that's just God's will, and we have to serve God, and even if God is treating humanity like a piece of shit all the time, that's his business, and we don't really have any business criticizing it. It's that kind of thinking, that for the Jews that got them arrested and put in concentration camps in World War II, and that's the kind of thing that they are sort of fighting their way out of now when they've become a lot more paranoid and say, okay, we're going to have to protect ourselves because nobody else is going to do it for us.
Now, we have 6 questions in 10 minutes. Let's see how we can get this. This other one is also someone who's misunderstanding the left-hand path. Bill O'Connell 13 asks, are Satanists and other similar groups engaged in human sacrifice?
Nope. The image of human sacrifice was very popular in the Eastern Mediterranean, in places like Canaan, in ancient Canaan. And as a matter of fact, the original Canaanite gods, among whom were Baal and Moloch, and incidentally one that whose original name in those days was El, which we have come to know as Jehovah, the original name of the Judaic god, who we call God today, were all into human sacrifice. You'll find a lot of it in the Old Testament, whether in the Abrahamic myths or otherwise. People are being slaughtered right and left as tributes and as commandments to honor Jehovah, or El, in those days. So there was a lot of human sacrifice in ancient Old Testament Judaism. And you can look at it in that way in terms of the New Testament, in terms of things like the Crusades, where if you were not a Christian or you were not the right kind of Christian, in things like the 30 Years' War, that you were a good candidate for being burned at the stake or just slaughtered. So if you're a Christian, don't talk to me, or a Jew, don't talk to me about human sacrifice without cleaning up an enormous amount of blood on your own plate. There was no toleration for human sacrifice in the Church of Satan, none of it in the Temple of Set. The ancient Egyptians certainly didn't indulge in it. And I would have to say that our plate is clean there. Now, if you find some kooky people today who are essentially Judeo-Christians, who are decided that they want to be evil Judeo-Christians, and that's their idea of Satanism, so they're kind of doing like they saw it in a Hollywood horror movie. I can't answer for that, but I wouldn't call those people authentic Satanists either.
Agreed. Now, here is the next question, same person. Why are alien abduction and demonic activities have so many similarities?
Because people have interesting imaginations. As I said, there are no aliens. Sorry to tell you about that. In the sense of all the gray people and that. And I enjoy good science fiction yarn like anybody else. These abductions aren't happening. Cattle mutilations are perfectly normal, as they've been investigated and found to be. Housewives that are sucked up into spaceships and come back to Earth pregnant, I'm sorry, you're going to have to come up with a better one than that.
Okay, another one. Did Aleister Crowley summon up the Loch Ness Monster?
Did he? Well, he had an estate up there called Boleskine House on the shores of Loch Ness, and he did do a number of magical operations up there. They didn't have anything to do with Nessie, the Ness monster, but he did conduct a number of magical operations up there, where he summoned up the Abramelin demons, as he says in his own magical records. So you'll have to, look at his magical records and see his explanations about that. And that's sort of a nice parade of traditional Judeo-Christian monstrosities that he had a lot of fun scaring his English audiences with.
Let's see who else I can get here. A lot of people are asking for more time. They were asking if we could do an after show, and I told them that we'll bring you back. That would be the best answer.
Sure.
People definitely, and I have missed some questions here. Now, there is one that I think is relevant. Let me see if I could find it, because there is a lot here. And thank you, Adaraki Studios, who's asking for who wants the after show. A lot of people here do. Okay, now, I'm trying to find the one about the Kepler website. Basically, it has
and if you buy, and incidentally, by the way, if for any reason you run out of guests and you want to do a round 3 on this, I'm perfectly fine on that too.
Okay. Well, this is good. Definitely people would like to take that advantage of that. Is the CERN breaking the veil and loosing a pollen from the pit? Are there fallen angels or Nephilim in chains underground in Antarctica?
Short answer is, I don't know what's underground in Antarctica. I know that there's been a lot of speculation about Antarctica in recent years also, because we're coming up with a much better bunch of detection tools to look down under the ice surface there. I think I mentioned earlier that there has been some speculation about the shifting magnetic poles on this planet, and that before the last shift, several tens of thousands of years ago, that might have been a very tropical area, because they have found, I believe, in Antarctica some fossil remains of temperate plant growth and things down under the surface there. But whether Atlantis is underneath there or just a nice big lush, tropical jungle, I don't know. But it's definitely a place to keep your eyes on. A very fascinating area there.
Now, let's see where else here. So are you open for this after we finish with UPRN and Deprogrammed and iHeartMedia to do this exclusive after show with these loyal people?
Sure, why not?
Okay. So I hope, Joe, you heard that in the background. And after we get disconnected, Dr. Aquino, I will bring you back so the stream does not end, fine, folks. So there you go. We are having this after show. Okay, now let me find this one. What was the purpose of LaVey playing into the devil-horned Christian version of Satan?
Well, the Church of Satan had two initial sort of watchwords. One was it was attacking the hypocrisy of conventional society, and particularly of conventional religion, in which the devil was the anti-principle versus their supposedly good God. So by taking the role of the devil, he was more or less putting it back in their face and saying, no, the devil is the hero here. He's the Promethean character, and your God is the bad guy. So there was an element of kind of back in your face with it, but also because this whole notion of getting into the research into the black arts, this was a big forbidden area of dark science, dark arts, that people weren't supposed to go look at. This was kind of like Lovecraft, in reality, that this is, okay, you've got the Necronomicon here. Are you going to open it and read it or not, And people like me were not only just interested in making a social statement, we wanted to get at the guts of the universe and find out what humans are, what the universe is, what's real and what's not. And Anton LaVey seemed to have this same Indiana Jones attitude towards getting past the gates that say do not enter and going on into those same areas and seeing what comes up when you start doing this black magic stuff. So that was part 2 of the Church of Satan, and it's also been the attitude of the Temple of Set. We look into all kinds of things that people that have big signs on them saying, don't go here,
There are more questions related to this part, so let me see if I could find one that is not just literally a repeat. Okay, on another show, TFR Beyond the Veil, Chris, I think, and Sheer Geo said they used ayahuasca at a pyramid in Egypt to go unlock the Temple of Set or Sirius to bring on the Age of Aquarius. Is this possible?
I think they're referring to Aiwass. I think they're AIWASS, and I think they're referring to Aleister Crowley's Cairo working of, I think it was 1903. I could be off a year or two on the date. But when he was in Egypt with his first wife, Rose, he conducted a series of workings in Egypt called the Cairo working, which resulted into a magical text which he called the Book of the Law. And he said that when he used Rose as his medium for these invocations to Horus, by whom he meant actually Ra-Harakti, the great celestial Horus, rather than the Horus of Osirian legend, he got a manifestation of this character Aiwass as his holy guardian angel, sort of standing over his shoulder, as it were, and dictating the 3 chapters of the Book of the Law, which were, I think it was Nut, the Egyptian sky goddess for the first one, Hadit, which is actually an Arabic name meaning a specific point, or Hadith, and Ra-Hurkut, which he identified as the Osirian Horus, but was actually Ra-Harakti as the dawning sun in the cult of Ra for the 3 books of the Book of the Law. So that's where the Book of the Law came from, and that was his basis for creating the AA, or Silver Star initiatory school, which was his variation on the pre-existing Golden Dawn, which was his primary initiation when he joined.
Now, because we have to wrap up on this network right now, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Dr. Aquino, because obviously, I always have comments after your quest or your answers. So, but
Okay.
we've just been piled onto this. So, first of all, I want to thank you, and I'm gonna call you after I have do your plug-in, so we start this after show with these loyal fans here on YouTube. But for the people listening around the globe from UPRN, Deprogrammed, iHeartMedia, where can they find you? And of course, you mentioned your books, assuming I'll just say it again for you, that just Google your name or go into Amazon, Michael Aquino, and there are a lot of them there.
Yeah, as I said, the easiest way to find the books, just go on to Amazon.com, and you'll find all of my books are there. They're all in print and available as paperbacks or as Kindle ebooks. The Kindle ebooks are all paperback replicas, meaning I had to use them as, they're sort of like photographs of the pages of the print books, because of the enormous amount of footnotes that are usually in there. And if I tried to do them as a straight text, the way people like to do ebooks, it would have been a completely incomprehensible jumble. So I would recommend that you pick up the paperback if at all possible, but you can certainly look at the Kindle stuff online and see what it's like there. And all these books you can look on their Amazon pages, and you can look inside them and get a rough idea of their tables of contents and what they're all about.
Well said. Now, of course, I have a lot of thank yous I have to give. Of course, the station owner, UPRN, Joe Montaldo. iHeartMedia, I want to throw you a shout out as well for carrying our show. JC of Deprogrammed Radio. Pam Vrettenberg, who is my social media manager. And UnitedTruthSeekers.com is our website. We also have Adaraki Studios. Adam Keene, who does a lot of work behind the scenes and is a moderator. And, of course, remember, folks, we have to thank Josh Terrace, who is my assistant producer. And better yet, just call him assistant, because he does a lot more than that. Now, we are going to go into this extra after show. So normally I would just wrap things up. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to disconnect from the station. So all you fine people at UPRN and Dr. Aquino, I'm going to disconnect from you, and I'm going to bring you right back so we can stay live on this stream. All right?
Okay, you going to call me back or just...
I'm going to call you right back.
Okay.
All right. Let's do it. All right, friends. Well, I thank you all for joining us today on this UPRN. Now let me go start with, of course, Dr. Aquino, bringing him back. Let's see here. How can I get my calls with dial pad? Let's bring him on. And he is a great friend, and he is a genius. I know a lot of the left-hand path is misunderstood, and I gotta tell you folks, Lasha, I know where your concerns come from, and same to Bill. I had my very own concerns of the same thing too. The thing is once I realized and started doing a lot of the reading that it's not what it really is, then of course that's the biggest problem. Now hold on a second here, because I'm getting another call while I'm trying to call our guest. So anybody trying to call me, hang tight, because I am trying to bring in Dr. Aquino again, since he is standing by. And remember, folks, it is an honor to host him. We don't get him very often. For a while, he was not doing interviews, so the fact that we got him is a pleasure. Let's see if we got him back. And we are now calling him. And let's see if we get him. And I see, Bill, you have your next question. Let's make sure we're
Hello?
still... Dr. Aquino, okay, we are back on this very, very special after show that people are that we're asking for. So I'm just going to, since everyone knows exactly what, of course, who you are and where you came from, the books you've written. Let's see here. Bill O'Connell has another question. Is it possible government scientists are experimenting on humans and leaving memories of demons or aliens in their head to cover their tracks, and that's why similarities?
Well, I don't think so, because remember what I was talking about, the parts of our brain that retain memories and that don't. You could plant very short-term memories in the conscious part of the brain, but they wouldn't be retained, and you couldn't rely on them to stay put. In other words, this is what stage magicians would do when they're doing stunts with hypnosis and using post-hypnotic suggestions. The stuff that's long-range is a much vaguer, more generalized thing, and that's these patterns. And you can't put a clear picture like a person's name or face or something like that into pattern thinking by sort of programming it in there. So I would have to say no, that they can't do that. Now, having said that, just a few days ago, I was listening to some very interesting discussion on the radio by people who are working on in the sort of the current areas of brain science, and they are saying that they can transfer a memory from one rat to another rat by computer, by taking a reading of the the brain of rat number 1, and then putting that in the computer and then downloading that into rat number 2, so that rat number 2 will remember the way through the maze or something like this. And that therefore they say that it's just sort of a question of time and scale before they could do the same thing with human consciousness. I would have to say that I disagree in terms of human consciousness, and I would also say we've got a very long way before you can narrow it down to the point where you can actually take a memory from person A and move it over into person B, because you'd have to be able to isolate all of the physical components in the brain of memory A, and the brain is much too vast when it puts things together on the in that 95% subconscious level. Find out all the little bits and pieces of electronic data that go into that. So I would say that they might be able to get a very generalized thing like that with a rat, but not on human beings for a very long time to come.
Now, I have brought on, as I mentioned earlier, Adoraiki Studios' Adam Keene to be part of this part. Adam, do you have any questions for Dr. Aquino yourself?
I do. Hello, everybody. Hi, all the listeners. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for the show. And thank you, Dr. Aquino, for, again, being a return guest. We all are very, very intrigued by this topic.
Topics.
Yeah, plural, definitely plural. So I have a question. Mainly just kind of like as a generalization. What do you think the biggest misconception about all this is? What do you think is like the most misunderstood thing?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase that?
I can rephrase.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Adam, you're coming in a little choppy. He's asking if you could rephrase that question.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Dr.
Yes.
Aquino. Okay, good. There we are.
We're going to try it again.
Okay, repeat it, Adam.
Over there.
So what's the question?
All right, so the question is, can you, kind of in a broad generalization, give everybody evidence of the biggest misconception, like the most misunderstood out there in the public, the media just runs over it. What is the biggest misconception about this?
When you say this, what are you referring to? Are you referring to metaphysics or politics or war or brain science or what? In other words,
It really depends on where you want to go with it. I was going to say
parameters?
metaphysics, I think that there's a lot of misconception out there about what is possible and what's not possible. And I think that a lot of disinformation gets thrown into the mix, and I think that it really throws off a normal person's ability to kind of grasp the possibilities and the truth of things like, our psyche, our empathicness.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me try and answer it this way. And again, sort of a generalized area here, but I would say if somebody is trying to get you to buy, let me answer it this way. One of my friends is from the Jefferson Airplane, Grace Slick. When I was talking with her once, just said, Mike, everybody wants to sell you their shorts. Meaning, are you there?
Oh, yes. He's here.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. She said, Mike, everybody's trying to sell you their shorts, which by which she meant that when people come up and trying to convince you about something, they usually have an angle or a motive for doing it. So if somebody's trying to get you to believe in a particular doctrine or a particular philosophy or a particular ideology or a way of looking at what we should do with science or politics, I would say take a look at the source to begin with and say, okay, so what's their angle? What are the shorts that they're trying to sell me here, and why? And make a certain amount of allowance for that, but do your own investigating and come up with an answer that makes sense to you that doesn't pad them, but makes sense to you, so that you can look at it. You can look at yourself in the mirror and say, "Okay, I buy it. That makes sense. That's kind of going to be where I'm going to come from until somebody comes up with a better solution for me."
I agree. Okay.
Okay, now let me ask this here. We have a couple more questions here written. This is again from Lars Saturn. Yeah, Adam, if you could mute for a second, because your audio is not quite coming out normal for the second until you get that fixed real quick. Lars Saturn is asking about the Order of the Trapezoid rituals in the German castle, and Dr. Aquino's own meaning of 9. And there's just a big question mark after that.
The castle he's probably talking about is the Schloss Wewelsburg in Westphalia, the area of Germany near Paderborn, and that is an old medieval castle that became famous or infamous because during the Third Reich, Heinrich Himmler picked it as the Mittelpunkt der Welt, the center point of the world, in his idea of an SS-based theology or cosmology. It was going to be sort of the pinpoint of the spear of destiny, around which the SS was going to design an entire complex of buildings after the war, after it had won, quote unquote, So the Wewelsburg is a very small triangular castle. You could walk from one side to the other in about a half a minute, in terms of its interior. 3 major towers, of which the north tower is kind of the pinpoint and the big one. And that's the one where he built 2 particular rooms during the period of the Third Reich, the so-called Valhalla underneath, or the crypt, or the Gruft, and directly above it, the Grail Hall, which is sometimes mistakenly called the Gruppenführer's Hall after the generals of the SS, but is actually a reproduction of the Grail Hall from Wagner's Parsifal. So I'd been hearing occasional rumors about the Wewelsburg in the years prior to the 1980s, and when I was assigned as a political officer to NATO headquarters in the early 80s, I decided I'd take a trip up to Westphalia and look around and see if I could actually find this thing and see did it exist, and if so, what it was. So I tracked it down. It was very peculiar because when you're coming up on the Wewelsburg and you actually go through the little German town of Wewelsburg, you can't even see the castle until you go up and you ask a few people, "Where's the castle?" "No, up that back road there." And you go up a sort of a dirt road at one end of the village, and then you turn a corner and suddenly, poof, there's the castle, almost like it materializes from in front of Parsifal. So I managed to find the Wewelsburg. I went in and I identified myself to the caretaker as an Army officer and also as a professor from an American university, which I was at that time, Golden Gate University. He gave me the respect that the Germans tend to traditionally give to academicians, and gave me a personal tour of the castle as it was at that time, and including those 2 ceremonial chambers, which are normally under lock and key in the North Tower. And I then asked him if I could spend some time alone in the Gruft for some meditation down there. And he said, "Most certainly, Herr Professor Doctor," and he gave me the keys and turned me loose. So I conducted a magical working down there, the Wewelsburg working, which became the basis for the Order of the Trapezoid as it was reconstituted within the Temple of Set thereafter. The name Order of the Trapezoid had been used in a sort of a casual sense in the old Church of Satan days as a kind of an architectural thing that had most of its connection to German influence had to do with architectural influences of the Trapezoid in architecture and in the expressionism of the UFA movies, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, The Golem, Metropolis, and other movies that have some strange angles and disturbing Lovecraftian kind of influences in them from that aspect. So we took it to the next level in the Temple of Set as a result of this Wewelsburg working, including, of course, going back to the Westphalian roots of this, which had to do with the Weimgericht, or the Order of the Holy Weim, in ancient Westphalia, which was a sort of a, what you'd call maybe a vigilante group of law and order in the most lawless days of that area of pre-unified Germany. And between the metaphysics of the Weim and what we had learned, and also the Wagnerian principles that Himmler brought into it, we constructed the Order of the Trapezoid as a knightly order within the Temple of Set.
Here are some more questions that are piling up in the chat. This comes from Joseph, again, I hope I pronounced the last name correctly, Korea. Could Dr. Aquino share any cool, lesser-known stories from his Church of Satan days, maybe some involving Xena?
Well, let's see. Again, the lifespan of the Church of Satan as a functioning organization was 1966 to 1975. I joined it in 1969. And so I knew Xena as a little kid, from 1969 or 1970, I guess, when I first met her, up to 1975. And then at that point, of course, I was estranged from the LaVey family per se for many years, but Xena and I met again in the 1980s, around 1987 or 88, I guess, when Geraldo Rivera had his infamous Halloween special about satanic crime, quote unquote. I went on as a spokesman, and so did Xena, and we met there and renewed our friendship. And a few years after that, she and her husband, Nicholas Schreck, decided to join the Temple of Set. They spent a better part of the next 10 years as Setians, and both were very much respected and very highly regarded. Both achieved the 4th degree of initiation as Masters of the Temple. They left shortly thereafter, but again, very, very intelligent and interesting people. I'm very, very grateful for the time that I have interacted with both of them that way. And in the early days, back in the Church of Satan, as I said, Xena was a little kid. So I would just see her occasionally when she was bouncing on Anton's or Diane's knees, so to speak. Their other daughter, of course, was Carla LaVey, very beautiful teenage lady back then. And she, of course, she was Anton's daughter by his first wife, Carole LaVey, who dates back, pretty much before the Church of Satan was founded, per se. And Carl and I were also very good friends. We lost contact after 1975, but again, very charming and beautiful lady.
Here is 2 interesting questions. One from HolidiumLabs.com. Who is the smartest Satanist you met in the science world? To me, it's you, but I'll leave you to answer that.
The smartest Satanist that I've met in today?
In the science world.
In the science world, I'd have to process that in my head, because I don't. I'm sort of trying to run through the Temple of Set is where I would look for that, and that would be that's a huge number of people, a lot of whom we've got a lot of PhDs in hard sciences and things, and I would have to comb through a lot there. But back in the days of the Church of Satan, I'm trying to think if we had any hard scientists there, and I can't really remember any that were, credentialed hard scientists. The closest, I guess, would be somebody, a social scientist, is a professor in history at the University of San Francisco, John Farrow, who was also, like me, a master in the Church of Satan. But again, that's a social scientist, and I can't think of any hard scientists.
I think he's too modest to name himself.
In the Temple of Set, we've...
That was some interruption. Keep going, Dr. Aquino.
Oh, I was just going to say that in the Temple of Set, we have had a lot of fun, particularly in the area of the Order of the Trapezoid, is what we call mad doctors. In other words, Setians who are messing around with these principles of lesser black magic and create mad laboratories with all kinds of Tesla coils and Van de Graaff generators and all the stuff that you see in Hollywood horror movies, all jacked up to create Frankenstein laboratories. That's an enormous amount of fun, of course. And Anton LaVey deserved a lot of credit himself for starting that going, because in the basement of 6114 California Street, in what was called the council chamber, probably the most secret room of the whole place, he had an altar that was all rigged up with Tesla coils, Van de Graaff generators, and all this electronic stuff, ultraviolet lighting, to create really ionized atmospheres for the workings that went on down there, which would put you in some very peculiar mental states. And he used to have to caution everybody, don't look at these sources when you go in there. It's a little bit like saying, don't look into the eyes of Medusa, because you can't start staring into ultraviolet light sources unless you want to fry your eyeballs or do a lot of skin damage. So he had to have a lot of this stuff shielded, and also tell people be a little careful, when you're getting too close to these Jacob ladders, things like this, unless you want one hell of a shock, But Mad Labs and we had a word for this, the Electrician Vorspiel, which means the electronic prelude. You'll find one of these ceremonies or rituals illustrated. The text for it is illustrated in my Church of Satan book and its appendices. And these fed on sources like Frank Belknap Long's story of the Hounds of Tyndallus, which he also took from a number of pre-existing sources from Lovecraft on. So this, is an enormous amount of fun, really great area to poke around in. Just be careful you don't electrocute yourself in the process.
Now this is from somebody else, I can't pronounce the name properly, and this is also from left field, but hey, I'm trying to be fair and asking the question. So, Dr. Aquino, who is the most powerful Satanist in the Catholic Church?
I'm sorry, you broke up when you asked that.
Who is the most powerful Satanist in the Catholic Church?
Okay, the question I heard is, who is the most powerful Satanist in the Catholic Church?
That's right.
I don't know of any. I don't know of any by name, because the Catholic Church as an institution is based on a lie, which is the fiction of the Judeo-Christian mythology, and an authentic Satanist would not participate in a lie. So I would have to say nobody.
Now, I'm going to turn it to Adam. Adam, are you still with us?
No, of course.
Okay, do you have any questions of your own? Because I know we've been keeping Dr. Aquino a long time, and I know there's questions in the chat, but like Dr. Aquino said, he is available, and I'm sure you might... Are you getting a little tired, Dr. Aquino? Because I was going to end this soon.
Well, I'm okay. I'll let you know if I run out of gas here.
Okay, we'll do some more. Adam, go ahead.
Dr. Aquino, again, we thank you a lot for, especially for coming on and during the after show. So, I had a question, and I was just kind of reading back on some things. What is your experience or knowledge about psilocybin, LSD, any type of psychedelics, back when you were involved in your kind of hush-hush days during your service, as far as I don't know, I guess the unknown, psychedelics, how it opens the mind, consciousness. Can you give us any insights as far as how any psychedelics might be involved?
Okay, for whatever reason, I'm getting very broken up.
Yeah, Adam, your audio's not very good.
So I couldn't really...
Adam, I'm unfortunately...
Let me see if this is what he was asking.
Okay.
I think he was asking from my days back in the 70s and 80s, what was the impact of LSD and the stuff that they were looking into at Esalen and other sort of consciousness-raising places then. Are there any interesting aspects of that? And the answer is, okay.
Psychedelics and
is that the right question?
Yes.
Is that the right question?
Yeah. Esotericism and psychedelics.
Okay, I'm still getting broken up here.
Yeah, Adam, if you could disconnect and write that question in a chat, that would make it easier for us. He was asking about psychedelics, and I don't see what the other part was. Let me see if I could find it that he actually did write. No, it's not here. I think I
heard him bring Esalen into that.
Yes, go ahead and answer it that way.
Let me go ahead and address a bit of that. Okay, let me go ahead and address a bit of that, which was back in the 80s, when I was first getting into the original mind war research that I was doing at the headquarters of the 7th Psychological Operations Group in San Francisco. I began tapping into the intelligence community concerning updating myself on what was going on in psychic research generally, internationally, and also in the U.S. intelligence community. I found out that very little was going on in the U.S. intelligence community. Most of the stuff was very lightweight and very parenthetical. I gathered that a lot of the people in the U.S. intelligence community didn't want to tarnish their reputations by seeming to get involved with silly stuff, that might mess up their intelligence careers. And if they were found to be poking around in esotericism, then they would make themselves look ridiculous and kiss off their future careers there. So that meant that there were not very many sophisticated studies within the U.S. intelligence libraries, by which I combed the Defense Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, among others. And I happened to be discussing this with Michael Murphy, who was the head of the Esalen Institute down below Big Sur. Esalen was a touchy-feely place in the 60s and 70s, still very famous as a place to go kind of waggle your fanny and to explore consciousness in a nice, friendly, touchy-feely environment, a sort of a Big Sur atmosphere down there. That's where Hunter Thompson first got started as a security guard, incidentally, of all things, if you trust him with weapons. And I ran into Michael Murphy because he wrote a book called An End to Ordinary History, which is a discussion about metaphysical research and ESP research in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. I read that book, which I just kind of bumped into in a Berkeley bookstore by accident, and I said, this is a hell of a book, and I smell something here beyond just him making stuff up. So I got a hold of Michael Murphy. We got together and met, and he pointed me to a specialized researcher that he was working with at the time called Steve Donovan, who was one of his partners at Esalen, who is working on something called the Transformation Project of Human Evolution, based right here in San Francisco in the Marina area. So he introduced me to Steve over at Steve's place, and Steve had a very nice little apartment here which had room after room after room after room of files, mostly from behind the Iron Curtain, with all this ESP stuff in it, but also all over Europe, and a number of these third areas like this, far beyond anything that they had at Langley or in national agencies in Washington. And he just said, here, help yourself. And of course, he didn't deal in classified information. He just deals with the stuff that he gobbled from several trips to and from the Soviet Union, both him and Michael Murphy. So I just spent days or months, just going through these files and coming up with all that kind of interesting stuff that way. None of it really had to do that much with LSD or the kind of things that Timothy Leary was talking about, because that just seemed to be a pathway to sort of dreamy metaphysical, dreams of a sort of a pleasantly incoherent nature that you could induce in yourselves by sucking on a sugar cube. But in terms of giving me some really interesting avenues into ESP research on the other side of the Iron Curtain, that's where it came from, the SLN channel, through the Transformation Project, through Michael Murphy and Steve Donovan.
Now, here's another question. This is Third Phase of Moon. They are one of the largest UFO YouTube channels with over 700,000 subscribers. They came in late, so I'm going to read their question, Dr. Aquino, word for word. Does the lieutenant have any proof of the devil?
Okay.
Video photos?
Okay, it would be actually Lieutenant Colonel, not Lieutenant.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And, I just read it word for word, but you're right.
Okay. And I would, in terms of proof, I'd say yes. In terms of a photograph, I'd say no. Because a photograph is a representation. It's a picture of something in the objective universe. And the principle of isolate subconsciousness, which is the source for your personal sense of identity, which is what we're talking about when we get to the Prince of Darkness or Set, is not part of the objective universe. It is a principle and a force and a presence outside of it in its own subjective universe, of which you are a projection, which is how you come to identify yourself and your own consciousness as something outside of and able to perceive the objective universe as something distinct from yourself, and that the source of all this for you and me and Dr. J is that soul principle. You might say in terms of Plato, it would be the form of isolate self-consciousness is Set, or the Prince of Darkness. So the proof of the existence of Set is you. The fact that you are able to conceive of this, to ask me a question like this, and to be a distinct conscious entity that is not simply part of me or part of nature, but able to be unique and isolate and a distinct thing that can differentiate itself from that. So I would say, like Walt Kelly's Pogo, us is it. We as individuals are the proof, the indisputable, the absolute proof of the existence of something outside the objective universe, which is able to perceive it, perceive one another, and to actually have dialogue with one another.
Now, here's another interesting question, and I think a lot of time when people refer to Satanists, and you could probably agree with this, they refer to anybody with the left-hand path, whether it be the OTO, Temple of Set, OTO meaning Thelema. So this, I assume, encompasses this question. Name one Satanist that made his life better or made the world better.
Me.
There you go.
Anton LaVey.
Okay.
I'm not kidding. If I had not been moved to go off on all these different levels of investigation and truth seeking that I have, I would be a much poorer, and in terms of my intellectual abilities and things, I would be a much poorer individual than I am now. And to the extent that Anton LaVey got interested in this and decided to become a pioneer in it, despite the fact that he was starting off from a much simpler and lower base than I did, is to his credit. He was an Indiana Jones, floundering around looking for what he understood to be the Holy Grail. I've been the same thing. When you commit yourself to this and you go off on it, the enriching that you do and it rubs off on other people. I have never been an evangelist in terms of the Church of Satan or Temple of Set. I've said, look, this is the way I'm going about looking for the truth, and here's what I've learned so far. If you like the idea and you want to share in it and share your ideas with me, come on, let's do it. If not, that's fine too. There have been an enormous number of people over the years in both the original church and now in the Temple of Set who have taken these principles and these ideas and used them into their own education and their own benefit. And, it's just wonderful. So I would have to say there are thousands and thousands of success stories here by people who have just simply been honest explorers in this very fundamental kind of honesty, an ultimate honesty, which is the hallmark of what we do.
Now, and that's a very good answer. And as I've talked to you and other people who are in the COS, TOS, OTO, they have bettered themselves. And like you said, if they hadn't gone down that route of looking, then they wouldn't have ended up where they are. Okay, this is from Lasha Senyuk. We're only going to do a few more, Dr. Aquino, because I definitely will have you back. These questions will always keep coming for you. Okay, what do you think of the mystics, that change the psychic influences of Earth's electromagnetic fields? Can the powers that be manipulate consciousness through Earth grid manipulation?
I'm going to take a bit of a jump here because I'm not conclusive on this, but I would say that hypothetically, in terms of what I've learned from my research so far, I would say yes. The reason I say that is that that kind of thinking began with ideas in medieval and pre-medieval times of things like ley lines and avenues of current, going around the planet. And then they say, well, the pyramids are located on this, and Glastonbury Cathedral is located here on these ley lines and so on, so that there are kind of corridors of energy around the planet that if you are a sensitive person and you pick up on this and you create temples and objects and ceremonies and things that are on these locations, they will be that much more powerful. And there's a lot of smoke there. So then the question is, well, if there's a lot of smoke there, what about fire? Has anybody ever crossed the bridge into fire here to coming down with it? And the first people who did this were the researchers of Nazi Germany in the SS, but the ancestral heritage organization of the SS, which is what is sort of the collective that Heinrich Himmler sucked most of Germany's prime scientists into. And he was specifically originally looking for explanations, scientific ones, for some of these old myths, including the notions of sacred geometry and ley lines and so on. And his people said, well, it's not so much the ley lines themselves, but when you begin to correlate this with the Earth's magnetic sphere and its principal magnetic lines as a giant magnet, you find that there are very definite, lines of magnetic fields going around the planet. And that if you look at some of these locations, they are indeed, they happen to be right smack along things like the Giza Plateau and, incidentally, the location of the Wewelsburg in Germany, which is one of the reasons that Himmler got interested in that. So you have these large currents, these rivers of electromagnetic current based on the Earth's magnetic system going around the planet. And then the question is, can you tap into these as an individual human being using scientific instruments or otherwise, and can they have an influence on you? This is where it really becomes fun and where it also becomes that much more hypothetical, so don't quote me here per se, but you can use this as a place to kind of take off yourself. Here's some of the research that got going on this. We can thank NASA for this, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, because you'll find that solar activity on the sun is reflected in changes to the Earth's magnetic system and magnetic pulses and these lines of magnetic force going around the Earth, so that there's a direct correlation of solar electromagnetic energy to the Earth's electromagnetic energy, and there are some very interesting correlations to activities of human beings at the time of these surges and sinkholes in electromagnetic currents around the planet. NASA, as I said, if you go to the NASA website and you start looking, I forget what the term is, but you can look into electromagnetic energy currents there, and you'll find some really interesting stuff. And when I was going through the records of the Anarnerba in the U.S. National Archives and looking for all their research, I kept coming across all this too, which sounded pretty fantastic to me at the time. But it looked to me as though they were actually zeroing in on the same kind of stuff NASA's talking about. That brings us around to how much of the world's electromagnetic system, the planetary electromagnetosphere, impacts on human beings. The conventional answer is that we are not particularly ferrous intensity, as human beings. We don't have a lot of magnetically sensitive things in our bodies. But we also have more than most people suspect. In my book, Mind War, and if you go to the section on electromagnetics there, you'll find that we are sensitive to electromagnetic impulses. That's why people can get headaches, under power lines and things like this, and that it can have some very strange effects on our perceptions of reality. So we're just beginning to scratch the surface here. Some of the research that people are doing into mental images and being able to sort of get into the area of ESP and and sending human thoughts around have to do with the magnetosphere, as opposed to transmitting thoughts by some weird kind of remote viewing that doesn't have anything to do with that. So I would say that research that takes you down into the directions of kind of ooga booga remote viewing is silliness, and I really pissed the hell out of the Stanford Research Institute when I kind of exposed all that in the literature of the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, after they'd been working on that for so many years with the defense and intelligence communities. But that the area of electromagnetic information here and the magnetosphere and human sensibility to that is just beginning to get interesting. And as I'd say, start by going to the NASA websites and looking at that. And then if you like, go to some of the work that was done by the Anarnerba and some of the works that I cite in my bibliographies, such as Hitler's Secret Sciences, which goes into the work of the Anarnerba in this area, and you'll find some really fun stuff there.
I'm going to start winding this down. Okay, here is a question, and I hope you understand what Pyramid 7 is talking about when he mentions this. What was the purpose of specific chosen colors of the member medallion, if you know what he's talking about?
Oh, well, sure. I guess he's referring to the Temple of Set medallion colors. We have initiatory grades of six grades. Number one is they're all circular, and they all have a silver pentagram of Set with its 2 points up inside, but with the points of the pentagram not touching the circle. This indicates the distinction between the individual consciousness and the circles, symbolizing, of course, the objective universe of reality. And the first degree is white. This has to do with Setian first degree, which is an exploratory degree. This means you've joined the Temple of Set, you're a blank slate, And this is where you take a look at our arts and sciences and decide whether this is something that makes sense to you or not. If it is, you're welcome to proceed. If it doesn't, then you can take your leave with our best wishes and go look someplace else for what you're after. So that's the significance of white. It's a 2-year time period of initial exposure on as I said, the sort of the blank slate basis, you might say, of coming into this. The second degree is that of adept. We don't have a whole ladder system of adepts like institutions like the Golden Dawn or Silver Star does, or Rosicrucianism. You either an adept or you're not. You either know what you're doing here or you don't. And once you do, it's because you have this toolbox of stuff, and then you can use it in all sorts of different ways. And the red color of that medallion refers to just that you are now an adept of the Temple of Set. And Set was the only one of the Egyptian Neteru who was portrayed with red skin, so that's sort of a tribute to him in that way. And of course, you might say that red is a traditional color of Satanism, if you like devils in red underwear, I suppose. But that's the second degree. The third degree is black. Unsurprising, the priesthood of Set, or as it was in the Church of Satan, the priesthood of Mendes. And of course, the black symbolizes the black of the black arts and black magic and the Prince of Darkness and the circumpolar and stellar notion of this. The fourth degree is Master of the Temple. That's blue, and the blue color, again, as we originally designated it back in the Church of Satan days, was a reflection of the blue robes of the priest kings of Plato's Atlantis, and as discussed in the Republic, and of course the Timaeus and Critias. So it's the philosopher king color. And then the fifth degree, again taking its inspiration from Aleister Crowley's Book of the Law and Purple Beyond Purple, is purple, as the sight beyond eyesight. This is that of a magus or a maga, a person who creates or defines a new aeon of consciousness. Sixth degree is gold, taking its symbolism from such inspirations as The King in Yellow of Robert W. Chambers, the Elder Pharaohs in Lovecraft, sort of a multi-eonic perspective there. We also have a green medallion with a gold pentagram on it, which is the one that is used for honorary Setians. And the gold pentagram, as opposed to the silver of the others, means that it's a non-initiatory degree, it's an honorary degree. And the green, of course, is basically just the green of the natural universe outside. So those are the color symbolisms that we have.
Well said, Dr. Aquino. Now, I'm going to ask you again if you can hang by after I disconnect from everybody. But if you have any final words for all these fine people who have literally asked you questions for 2 hours and 40 minutes straight, what would you say?
I would say, we've covered a lot of ground here, and there have been a lot of terms that have kind of been bouncing around. So if there's anything that interests you, by all means, go off and check it out. And I have tried to record as much of what I have learned in my lifetime here in my books. So I recommend those, as particularly the ones I've cited, things like Mind War, Morningstar, the Satanic Bible, and of course the Church of Satan and Temple of Set books, and the Luminank. Go take a look at these, because they all have some pretty heavy footnotes and some pretty heavy bibliographies, which are some good starts if you want to get into your own research. But by all means, use your own common sense and your own sense of saying, okay, I'm not trying to fool myself or convince myself of something. I'm trying to do what, Michael Aquino did when he went out on this, which is you're trying to figure out what the fuck is going on here, okay? That's the big question. Who am I? What am I doing here? And what could I or should I be doing with myself during the time that I'm here as an incarnate being with a consciousness inside the middle of it? And that's what this is really all about. So give yourself a challenge and then go off on the adventure, be Indiana Jones, have a ball with it, you know, and you'll never look back and you'll never be sorry you did.
Well said, Dr. Aquino. Everybody, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Michael Aquino, PhD. Like I said, genius, mentor, friend, author, guest, and so much more than that. For all of those who I wish to thank, you already know who you are. And of course, for all you fine people that were in the chat engaging, thank you very much. You know exactly where to find us, and we'll see you again